Well, guys, after a devastating cliffhanger, we are given what is easily the most monumental and eventful season yet.
Don't change the channel. Don't touch that dial. We got it all on UHM. Take off your sneakers.
You don't wanna be crazy, and you don't wanna be crazy. To clarify, yes, no, I'm not crazy. We hope this helps. What?
Hey guys, just remember the first half of the season of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Season 3, and obviously I was very much looking forward to this season. Season 2 wrapped things up in quite an eventful way. It definitely went in a very unpredictable direction, and I still stick by it when I say the Season 2 finale may easily be the best episode the show has ever done. It just gave us so much context towards Rebecca's character. And in terms of this season, I was really worried, honestly, guys, that because of the way last season played out with, Josh leaving her at the altar and her going full on revenge, I was worried we were going to go in a direction where the show was going to lose focus, because that's been happening a lot with shows, where you kind of change things up and it really doesn't work. For example, what they did with You're the Worst. So I was very worried they were going to do that this season. And I have to say that those worries were quickly diminished once I saw this season, because this is easily, I think, some of the strongest episodes we've ever had of this show. It takes the show into a whole new direction, and if, they continue the quality that they've been having, this could easily end up being, I think, the strongest season we've had from this show yet. I am so happy the first half of the season's finally over, because I have been waiting to talk to you guys about this show. Honestly, guys, to be 100% honest, now that The Leftovers is over, I've been thinking about what my favorite show on TV may be, and this may very well be it, honestly. I have loved pretty much everything about this season. I only really have a few small nitpicks here and there, but other than that, they're not really anything that's detrimental to the overall season. But let's just get into this season, because I definitely do want to talk about it. And obviously, we have to start off by talking about Rebecca's plot, who, to say that this is a very eventful season for Rebecca is a pretty big understatement. I mean, she really goes through a lot. She learns a lot about herself, and not just in terms of Josh. There's a lot that she really goes through this season, and it's definitely a pretty big transitional season for her. She starts off the season, and, it's a couple weeks after Josh has left her, and she's nowhere to be found. She's basically gone to hiding. No one really knows where she is at this point, and she eventually shows up at White Feather and Associates, or whatever it's called now, because, Daryl's no longer in charge, and Nathaniel's now the one in charge, and she has completely renovated herself. I mean, completely just gone. It turns into a whole new persona. She's dyed her hair. She has a lot more agency. She's a lot darker, and she is set on basically completely destroying Josh Chan. I mean, that's what she said, and she wants to do it by any means necessary. However, we can see that she's really kind of lost, and she doesn't really know how she plans on doing it in a rational manner. Her, ways of doing this are completely ridiculous. One of them is to literally send poop to his house. I'm not even joking. She's gonna send poop in like a cake, and she's gonna make him eat it that way. Another one is she's going to, she decides that she's going to try to make a sex tape and try to leak it out and ruin his life in that way. She has all these ridiculous plans, and you can just tell, her head is not in the right place. But Paula, Valencia, and Heather are basically on board with whatever she's doing, and that's mainly because they're just really good friends, and they want to see her take down Josh. They want to see Josh they want to see Josh, obviously get the comeuppance that he deserves, and they want to see that revenge go down, but they know that she's not thinking clearly. And like I said, she entertains the idea of making this sex tape. She even hires a guy that looks exactly like Josh. In fact, I'm pretty sure it is Vincent Rodriguez that already played this part, and he completely looks like Josh, and she ends up not doing it at the last moment just because she realizes it's a horrible idea. It could ruin both of their lives. And she has this great scene where she tells Paula, the reason why she's not so worried about what's going to happen to her is because she simply doesn't care. She doesn't care about her own, well-being. She doesn't care what happens to her. She just cares that Josh is destroyed. She just cares that things go really bad for Josh, and she doesn't seem to care about the consequences, really, which is honestly really scary to think about. The fact that Rebecca's in such a dark place this season, but she probably is at her darkest point yet in this season. Not quite yet, but she kind of goes darker and darker as the season goes on, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But we end the episode with, they're all pretty much, they all pretty much are talking about how bad men are. They sing this whole song about, which we'll get to that song later when we talk about the songs in the season as a whole, which the songs, as usual, are fantastic. We'll talk about that later, but basically, they decide that they're going to try to sue Josh for what he did, and that's basically how, this part of this, season ends. However, as we see, even though they have this plan to build this case against Josh and therefore, making his life a living hell, Rebecca still doesn't feel like it's enough. She still wants, a lot more evil intent. So she turns to Nathaniel, and Nathaniel and Rebecca are in a very interesting place this season because you can tell Nathaniel is genuinely starting to develop feelings in a way that he's just not used to because, he's always had that attitude that he just needs to be cutthroat and not let anything get to him and just be completely heartless. But we see this season, he can't possibly do that. He is definitely gaining genuine feelings for Rebecca, and he doesn't really know how to comprehend it, and it's a lot of fun to watch, but it's so deep to the point where he will literally do anything for her. If she tells him to kill someone, he'll do it. If she tells him to, possibly, ruin Josh's life in some way, he will do it. Whatever she requests to him, he will do, and that's something that, again, does show how irrational Nathaniel is. Even though he's someone who isn't nearly as mentally damaged as Rebecca, he still is pretty sick, and he definitely, needs to take a step back, and we definitely do see that here. But Rebecca's in a place where she just doesn't care. She wants to do whatever's possible, so she goes to Josh, and not Josh, she goes to Nathaniel in all, 50 Shades style, which I love the way they kind of made fun of 50 Shades Darker here. I thought that was actually really funny, which, side note, I'm going to be reviewing that later tonight if you guys are interested, but, either way, this was honestly a lot of fun to watch, and the two do end up having sex. She basically tells him, do what I want you to do, and then you can do anything to me, and that's essentially what they do end up doing. But it goes really far once she realizes that he actually plans to harm Josh's grandmother, and obviously she's not, looking to do that. She realizes, holy shit, what am I actually doing here? So she decides that she's not going to do that. So what she decides to do instead is to actually confront Josh, because that's really all she wants. She wants clarity, why he left her, just letting him know what actually went down, and things go really far. But we're going to go to Josh in a second, because Josh this season, as we know, he has decided to become a priest. He thinks that that's the thing that he wants to do. It's just a different career path from him. However, Josh is pretty much, I think, just as lost as Rebecca. He really doesn't know what he wants to do at this point, and he doesn't realize how hard it is to become a priest. He thinks that he's just going to become one, and that's going to be it. He doesn't want to go through all the, process and all the schooling you need to do. He doesn't really want to go through all of that, and he doesn't really understand what he's getting himself involved in. He thinks it's just going to work out, that he's just going to become a priest and then he has nothing else to worry about. But he doesn't realize that when you become a priest, you're fully committed to the church and you can't be with anyone else. And that's exactly what you do. Your entire lifestyle is devoted to that, singular church. And that's something that Josh realizes that he might not necessarily be willing to do, and I thought, again, that was also particularly very strong here. But what Rebecca decides to do, she does at the worst time possible. She literally confronts Josh right in the church and basically tells him everything. And when I mean everything, she tells him everything, all from what Paula did with all the weird sort of scheming that she was doing behind Josh's back, including what she did with getting Rebecca invited to Valencia's wedding, the way that Paula was doing all of that sort of backstabbing behind Josh's back, how she was able to basically move their wedding for 2 weeks. And I mean, obviously Josh thinks she's insane and he wants to try to use this against her. So now we're in a situation where Rebecca's told Josh everything, and at first she feels really relieved that holy shit, he knows everything, I've gotten him out of my life, everything's cleared up. But now she realizes the implications of what that can actually do to her. There's a lot of repercussions there, and obviously she's very wary about that. We definitely do see that. And in the next episode, we see her younger self starts to get in her ear and tell her, look what you've done, you've ruined everything. And Josh wants to use this against her because he's realizing how crazy she is and what she's really done and how mentally unsafe she really is. So he decides that he's going to dig up all this sort of information, and he starts to think about Robert because he remembers that Rebecca told him about Robert, and Paula also is interested who Robert was, and Rebecca just says, oh, it was just her dog. But that really changes here once Josh actually realizes who Robert is, because he decides to contact the one person that might actually know, and that's her mother. He decides to contact her mother so he can find out what's actually going on, and it makes sense. I mean, sure, you could say Josh is kind of a dick for doing this, but at the same time, I mean, something like that, that's not something you just forget about. That's not something that you just pass off as, oh, she's just mentally unsafe. Oh, she's just, it was just her dog. Oh, it was nothing to really worry about. It's just the heat of the moment. That's not something you just forget about. That is definitely something traumatic that Rebecca went through, and what he ends up doing is he ends up telling pretty much everyone in her inner circle. I'm talking Valencia, I'm talking Heather. All of them end up finding out what Rebecca has done, and we end the episode with basically they go to Rebecca asking her for questions, and this is right when she's decided that she wants to run away with Nathaniel. Again, not thinking rationally at all. That's basically what Rebecca's doing in these first 4 episodes. She's just not thinking clearly in any sense of the word, and basically they are trying to maybe get some answers out of her. So now Rebecca's really fucked over because now everyone wants questions. They want to know what the hell's going on with her, and she decides she's just going to try to cut everyone out of her life. She already quit White Feather and Associates. She said, I'm done here. I don't want to work there anymore. She tells Daryl how pathetic he is. She tells a bunch of these characters, what they're really, what's how she really feels about them, and the stuff she says, I mean, sure, it's stuff she might have thought of in the back of her mind, but it's stuff I don't think she ever would have said to them if she wasn't in such a dark place this season. But because she is in this headspace where she's just not thinking rationally, all of those sort of ill-conceived thoughts that she thinks about the people around her, they start to come out here, and the stuff she says, I mean, it's really mean, and it's very harsh stuff. I mean, for example, Heather. We find out in episode 3 that Heather has finally graduated from college, and Rebecca tells her how, it's pathetic and that she has no life and that she's not going to go anywhere from here. She tells all kinds of stuff to them, and this really does start to have an impact on them. How Paula is just very controlling and how she's not her daughter, how she doesn't want her in her life. I mean, this is stuff that really does affect everyone, and that's something I really did like. I like that this isn't just stuff that they're just passing off as, oh, she's crazy. This actually does start to get them to question if she actually does have a legitimate point here, and I thought that was honestly really well done. It's actually one of my favorite parts of this entire season. What follows after this scene is probably one of the finest hours we have ever gotten in the show. Episode 4, Josh's ex-girlfriend is crazy, is easily one of the most standout episodes we've had, and that is mainly because the whole episode is pretty much constructed as this stalker-type horror movie, because that's really where Rebecca decides to go. She turns to this guy in, I believe, a camp who basically entertains the idea of becoming this stalkerish type character where, she's going to stalk Josh and make his life a living hell. And this character serves as basically the person who's telling her all the cliches that these movies usually follow, which makes us think that they're going to go in that direction. And I thought it was honestly very well set up because, as we know, this show tends to deviate from that stuff, and that's basically what this episode does do. She decides that, you know what, maybe I will do this. So she decides to stand outside Josh's house, and basically what she wants to do by doing this is basically scare him. She wants to scare him. She wants to make him think that he's crazy. She starts making all these like animalistic noises, starts to do all this crazy shit. I mean, it's insane the lengths that she really does go here. And again, it just really plays into the idea that Rebecca's just not thinking irrationally, and you know, she's not thinking rationally at all in any sense of the word. I mean, she's completely off her rocker this entire episode, and this is probably her darkest point yet, is what really goes down here. You know, Josh knows that there's definitely something going on. He pretty much thinks that it's Rebecca, because who else could it possibly be? Especially after everything she's tried to do. She's tried to make his life a living hell. She tried to make him a sex offender in the 3rd episode. I mean, this is definitely not something that's out of her character. This is absolutely something that she would in fact do. And she decides that she's going to take matters even further and literally kidnaps his mother. I'm not joking, she kidnaps his mother, but she can't bring herself to do anything serious to her. She can't harm her in any way, because she actually really gets along well with his mother. They actually have a really nice conversation, and she just can't bring herself to do it. And it's a really emotional scene, because Josh does end up finding her, and you know, basically she talks to him about how she loves him and how she, all that time, you know, she moved for him, and every action she did was basically for him, and basically admits to everything we've always thought, that yeah, this was basically all for Josh. All these years that she came to California was because of Josh. She even tells him how from that one conversation, that is what got her to go to West Covina. And you know, he sees her and he's like, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to push you? And he just can't bring himself to do it. He can't bring himself to hurt her, because that's just not who he is. And again, it really deviates from the cliches we see in these stalker type movies. And that's something I really do love here, is that this episode is very brutally honest in that that's not how it works in real life. In real life, there are consequences. In real life, these characters just need to keep living, and they need to get over these specific things that are plaguing them. And that's something that is much more horrifying than what you see in most of those movies. Just the idea that these characters need to move on. And it's just something that Rebecca isn't really interested in doing. So at this point, she's at the lowest point she could possibly go. She's got no one in her life. Paula starts to realize that maybe she is being a little too motherly towards Rebecca, and maybe she does need to take a step back. And it's a big revelation for her. I mean, they've always had this great relationship, and to see Paula realize that maybe she can't be as involved in Rebecca's life, it's really sad. And you really do see, you know, what she's going through. But she eventually realizes, I need to take action here. Rebecca is not well at all. She's going to make a horrible decision. So she decides to call Naomi. That's the person that she definitely needs to contact, because Naomi is the only person that can help Rebecca. So at this point, Rebecca, like I said, she's at her lowest point yet, and what she ends up doing is she goes to a bar, not even acting like her true self at this point, and she gets a call from Greg, and it's like, holy shit, Greg's actually calling her. And I love that they still acknowledge that Greg is still out there. It's not like they just erased Greg from the show. A lesser show would have done that. A lesser show would have been like, oh, Greg doesn't exist anymore. Greg was never a part of this. He is still out there. He's just not a part of her story anymore. And she calls him, thinking that maybe they're gonna reconnect, but instead she just gets silence. He actually butt dialed her, and she realizes that it was just a mistake. And what she decides to do next is probably the worst act she ever has committed. I mean, I don't think Rebecca's ever going to stoop lower than this specific thing that goes down. She meets up with Greg's dad, and at this point, Greg's dad, we know he's not really in that great of a place. We know he's not someone who is really a nice guy, but because of the fact that she's just longing for connection, she starts to bond with him, and it gets to the point where not only does she bond with him, but she actually ends up sleeping with Greg's dad. And yes, it is irrational, but again, it's not something that is entirely out of her character. For someone like Rebecca, who is so fixated on just having connection and just having someone in her life and not really caring about her own well-being and just caring about the fact that people care about her and that she has someone, it makes sense why she would gravitate towards Greg's father, and especially Greg's father, because it's her only real connection she has left of Greg. I mean, Greg has pretty much cut himself out of everyone's lives, which is understandable. He needed to. I mean, Rebecca was just not well. She wasn't thinking clearly at all, and he very well knew that, and he was able to turn himself around, which I think is the reason why we're not seeing Greg anymore, because he's turned himself around. He's made a good life for himself. Do I ever think we're going to see Greg again? Maybe one day, but I think at this point, Greg really has turned his life around, and Rebecca still really has to do that. And we end the episode in such a bittersweet manner where Josh Groban comes out, and we'll get to the song that he sings a little bit later, but basically the whole message of the episode is that, you know, there are consequences to this, and that this isn't like a movie where everything's just gonna wrap up in like 90 minutes. There's going to be long-lasting impact for what Rebecca's done, and nothing is going to change unless she actually gets the help. And finally, at the end of the episode, she realizes what she needs to do. She calls her mom, tells her she needs to come home. It's the last thing that she wants to do, but really is the only thing she has left to do, and that is the way this episode ends. Like I said, it's such a phenomenal episode. It is easily one of the best, I think, we've ever seen of this show, and it perfectly shows just how irrational and really how far Rebecca is willing to go. You know, she really, I don't think, is ever going to go farther than she did here. It is easily her lowest point yet, and it was extremely well constructed the way they did that here. So from here, she does decide to go back to Naomi, and the two are actually getting along pretty well, we see. At first, I mean, it's the normal sort of insults and her criticizing her, but eventually they start to get along really well, and Rebecca doesn't really know what it's about. If her mom maybe isn't so, you know, such as, for lack of a better term, she calls her a heinous bitch, maybe she's not as bad. But then we start to realize what's really going on when we find out that the reason Rebecca hasn't been acting as crazy as she has, and why she's been pretty content, is because of the fact that Naomi has been putting her anxiety pills in this drink that she's been giving her. And by doing this, you know, she's been trying to reduce the stress level. And you can see the good intention in Naomi. Scenes like this do show she cares about her daughter. It's just not at all the right way to handle it. It's not at all the right way to do things. And especially for Rebecca, someone who is so off her rocker, and someone who is very much not in a good place at all, and someone who is basically losing everyone, this is the last thing she needed to hear. I mean, she genuinely thought she was in a good place with her mother. She thought that maybe these two could actually finally get along. And realizing that basically all of that was just superficial, and it was all just a means of just, you know, her being castrated, and that's really all it was. It was just simple castration. This really gets to her, to the point where she decides that she's going to get out of there, and she does the one thing that I think has always been something that we've thought about her doing, but never really could foresee her doing in the future. And it finally comes up in this episode where she has a bottle of pills, she's on a plane, and she realizes, you know what, I have nothing left. Paula's gone, my mom's gone, no one cares about me. So she decides that she is going to kill herself. She takes the whole bottle of pills, and it's devastating. It's extremely devastating the way this plays out, but it's really well done at the same time. I thought this was extremely well handled. You could see Rebecca's at the lowest point in her life. She just doesn't feel like she has much more to do, but she actually survives. And this is, again, something that is very realistic. She doesn't, you know, she goes through with it, but she actually does survive. I mean, sure, she is in fact in need of help, but she actually does survive. And finally, she realizes that the one thing she needs to do is to finally get help, and that is when she basically is on the road to recovery here. So the final two episodes of this half of the season really do see Rebecca transform her life in a pretty drastic manner. I mean, she really is doing whatever she can to get herself that help, but it's not in a way that's unrealistic. It feels gradual. It feels like it's going to take a while. But the way she decides to do that is to finally diagnose herself. And again, this has been something that the show has hinted at, but it's always been something Rebecca's ignored. The fact that she is mentally ill. The fact that she's not okay, and that a lot of her yearning for Josh was less of her liking Josh and more of her just needing connection and needing some sort of meaning in her life. And I mean, she sums it up pretty well in episode 4 when she says that Josh was the meaning in her life, and without him, she doesn't really have one. And once again, we see Rebecca is still not all the way cured because she's 100% certain that this diagnosis is going to give her purpose. It's going to make her feel like she has a reason to live and that this is what she's really meant to do. And when we eventually get to the diagnosis, it turns out what Rebecca has is none other than borderline personality disorder. And I thought this was really cool. This isn't really something we see portrayed a lot on TV. You know, we see a lot of different mental illnesses, but not something like this. And this really, you know, hits Rebecca in a pretty big way because she realizes that the problem has never been a disease, it's been herself. I mean, if you don't know what borderline personality disorder is, it's essentially that, you know, your personality is just all kinds of fucked up. One second you're like happy, the next second you're like really irrational. I mean, that's basically what it ends up being. It's comprised of, you know, just your emotions being all out of whack. And that's basically what's happened to Rebecca. Her emotions have just been running wild throughout the entire show. And she's realizing it never was because of something that was wrong with her. It was because of her own personality. And she really starts to reflect on everything she's gone through. And we see in this episode that Rebecca, you know, Paula, Heather, Valencia, they're all understandably concerned because of the fact that they don't think, you know, in general that they, you know, they're very worried it's going to happen again. They're worried that Rebecca's still suicidal, but they want to stick by her all this time and they want to do what they can to give her the most, you know, the most convenience possible and be there for her and give her just the best support they could offer. And Valencia kind of takes things a little too far. She decides to start a whole movement for Rebecca, and, you know, Valencia, you know, Heather tells her she's taking things too far, gets her to take a step back, but we end the episode with Rebecca basically accepting that, yes, I do have borderline personality disorder. It definitely is something that I am going through. I need to do something about it as soon as I possibly can. And basically, she starts to come up with the idea that Josh never really was part of the problem. Josh was just her way of giving herself purpose. And at this point, Josh is pretty much irrelevant. Maybe she never really liked Josh in that way. Maybe she never really had a future with him. Maybe he was just a means to, you know, ignore her problems. Remember the song, We'll Never Have Problems Again. That was her ignoring what was really wrong with her, ignoring the fact that there definitely is something wrong, but just pretending it wasn't really an issue when it is in fact an issue. I mean, those underlying issues that she kept talking about in season 2 and, you know, in the intro, this is something that she finally is facing. She is facing that issue, and she's realizing now because of that, Josh never really was the problem here. Josh never really was the thing that, you know, was supposed to be in her life. It was just the thing that gave her agency, and now she's realizing that Josh was never the person that she really needed. It never was, you know, it's not even really a possibility anymore, and I really loved everything about this. I love, and especially right at that moment, we see Josh, you know, he really wants to go to Rebecca because the last time they spoke obviously wasn't on good terms. He told her to stay out of his life and he was going to give her a restraining order, and he wants to apologize and he wants to maybe reconnect with her. And right at that moment when he's about to do so, he has a bunch of flowers and he realizes she tells them that Josh is irrelevant, which makes him also lose purpose because he thought his purpose was also supposed to be with Rebecca. And that's something I love about the season. They hone in on the fact that both of these characters are not well. I mean, Rebecca definitely is the more irrational one, but Josh is still, he's not content in his life either, and he's not really in the best place that he could possibly be either, and that's something I really did love here. I thought they handled this perfectly. I thought this was such a great revelation to see. It's been a long time coming for the show to finally diagnose Rebecca, but I honestly think they handled it in the best way possible. So we'll get back to Rebecca in a second once we talk about the finale overall, but now I want to talk about one of the other big themes going on this season, which finally this character has actually gotten a proper treatment, Daryl finally gets an arc this season, and he's been a character that I've always enjoyed, but I never really feel like they've used him to his fullest potential. This season, now I'm feeling like they're starting to do that, because what we get with Daryl is probably one of the most satisfying arcs that we could have gotten with him, but it also is very bittersweet. Him and White Josh, they're coming up with, he entertained this idea to White Josh of possibly adopting a baby, and White Josh seems to be on board with it. It seems like he really wants to have one, but you can tell there's a part of White Josh that even though Daryl, they go to look at babies, and they go to this I believe it's one of those like children's centers or whatever, and Daryl's really into it. He loves bonding with these children, while White Josh, sure, he enjoys it, but he doesn't have the elated, blissful sense that Daryl really does have in doing this. You can see he's not nearly as interested, and Rebecca eventually harshly, when she's criticizing everyone in that big moment when, they're in her living room, in her and Heather's apartment, when she confronts everyone, she very harshly tells Daryl that he does not want a baby, he wants nothing to do with it, he's just not telling you because he's just too scared to, and Daryl at first thinks that, Rebecca's just out of her mind, she's just acting hysterical, she's not really thinking clearly, but then he starts to wonder, is this actually a possibility? Is it actually true that maybe he doesn't want the baby? And what he decides to do is he confronts White Josh one night, and White Josh tells him straight out, no, he doesn't want one. And at this point, they're kind of left at a crossroads. They don't really know what they're going to do from here. I mean, this is something that it seemed like, this was a possibility. Like, they could have a baby. This was something that Daryl really wanted to do, but White Josh is just not interested at all. And this is something that they're kind of left stuck here, where you can tell that they have this dilemma, but they don't really want to do anything about it. And it's very similar to what we got with Supergirl, but I thought it was more well handled here because it was a lot more realistic in that sense, the way they handled it. I thought that this particular problem that we have going on was honestly really interesting. I thought they handled it very well, and we'll talk about how that does resolve in the finale, but this was a very well done arc for Daryl. It's about time that he finally gets something to do, and I was very impressed with what we got here. And then the only other thing to talk about, like I said, is with Nathaniel, who does go through a pretty big arc this season. Like I said, he is starting to develop feelings here for Rebecca that he just can't really comprehend. He's never really felt this way before about someone, and when he gets word that Rebecca tried to kill herself, he really doesn't take this lightly because, obviously, not just because he cared about Rebecca, but there also is a much more bigger issue than we would have suspected, and that reason is because we find out that when he was a kid, his mother actually tried to kill herself, and he's grappling with Rebecca's suicide and comparing it to his mother's and his parents that haven't really been in his life a lot, and his mother's kind of put this on the back burner. She hasn't really admitted this to his father, and he finally gets her to come to terms with it, and it's a really well done scene. I really love we got here with Nathaniel. It shows that, yes, he can be very cold-hearted, he definitely can be very callous sometimes, but he really is a guy who, like most of these characters, is very damaged, and he's gone through a very rough time in his life, and he hasn't really had the greatest life in the world, and I like seeing how he was comprehending all of that. I like seeing how he was kind of dealing with all of this, and I thought definitely this was a particularly very strong first half of the season for Nathaniel. Also, let me just say right now, I do want to talk about some of the technical stuff. The directing this season is probably some of the most dynamic we've had all season long, particularly in episode 4. Like I said, that entire episode is constructed almost as if it's a horror stalker sort of film, and complete with like the aspect ratio being different, and the camera work is a lot darker. I mean, they really went all out to make this look like a horror film, and they did an excellent job with that, and it's some of the most phenomenal work I've ever seen from this show. I mean, this show has always had fantastic camera work, but this is easily some of the best I've seen in the three seasons I've seen of the show. It's some of the best in the whole run, honestly. They did an incredible job with that. Like I said, the writing this season is just so well done. The whole season, I think, is really about just finally, realizing who you really are and realizing your full potential. And also, Rebecca realizing that it never was about Josh. It never was about Greg. It was about the fact that she has these problems, and she was using these relationships as a way to put that on the back burner and ignore it, act like it's not a problem. But now it's gotten to the point where it's just going to get worse and worse, and until she does something about it, nothing's going to change. And I really love the way they handled it. It was just very beautifully handled. Everything that went down with Rebecca this season just felt so realistic, and it didn't feel like something you see now in usual scripted TV. It felt very real. It felt like this is actually how it would play out, and they did that perfectly. But what I also loved about this season, unlike last season, is, season 2, there were a lot of characters that I thought were a little bit underused and didn't have a ton to do. And some of those characters, yes, that is definitely true. Like, there are some episodes Heather and Valencia aren't even in. Valencia especially does not have a lot to do this season. When she's there, she's great. Not Vella, Lovell, the actress who plays her, Gabrielle Ruiz, is extremely talented, but she just doesn't have a ton to do this season. However, unlike last season, they really give everyone a great plot line. They really give everyone something to do, and that's something I definitely really did enjoy, including Paula, who's got this weird stuff going on with Scott, where they're trying to, turn their relationship around, and he keeps calling her by the boss that he had, by his coworker that he had an affair with. I mean, stuff like that, it's very weird, but it's welcomed. It's good to see these characters finally get the spotlight. Even some of the smaller characters, like Tim, for example, does have a really well done arc where he realizes that his wife not may be into sex as much as he thinks, and maybe she's just been pleasuring herself, and that's the only reason why she's felt satisfied, and that maybe he never really was the one who was the main reason for her sexual satisfaction. And something like that, yes, it's silly, but it's really sort of fucked up. It really makes you think about it a lot, and it's something that really makes you feel very self-conscious, and I thought that was honestly very well handled. I love the way that stuff was done. My only real complaints this season, which let me just say, it's very hard to find one because this season was phenomenal so far. It's very hard to complain about it. When Rebecca leaves White Feather and Associates, there's this woman that comes in named Cornelia, and pretty much all of the workers there, we're talking Daryl, Maya, who Maya also has a lot more to do this season, Jim, and Nathaniel, they're all trying to get close to her. They're trying to treat her as if she's Rebecca just because they miss Rebecca so much. They're using Cornelia as a way to make up for Rebecca's absence because she's very conspicuously absent. They very much do feel the void in the workplace, and they try to get close to her. And in my opinion, this was just extremely rushed. I think they treated this character really not that great. I think they could have handled this in a lot better of a way where it didn't feel as rushed as it really did. But honestly, everything else going on this season, I can't really complain too much about what happened there. I think they really could have dived just a little bit deeper into that, but they just honestly didn't, and I wish we would have gotten just more with that character, because she literally disappears after that because she thinks they're all crazy. And I get it that she's like the most rational character on the show. I totally understand that. And she's like, who are all these freaks that are trying to warm up to me? I mean, obviously she gets kind of taken aback by it, and especially when they're all like ganging up on her, trying to figure out, who has the best relation with her and who is she closest with. Obviously, she gets out of there, but I really did not feel they handled this character well at all. I think they really could have utilized her more, and, I think they could have done a lot more with her. But other than that, I can't really find too many complaints with this season, honestly. And then in terms of the music this season, the music is better than it's ever been. In my opinion, this might be the strongest season in terms of music, and that's really just because of how vast it is. I mean, it's so spread out, and there's such a variety of music, which there's always been in the show, but this season especially, they tackle so much more, and you can tell so much of their budget went into this music. I mean, the first song in general is huge. It's this huge, like, elaborate Disney type number where they're all trying to figure out where Rebecca is gone, and just to see how this is expanded from this just being Rebecca's unconscious feelings to pretty much now everyone getting in on the act is really cool to see, and it just shows how far they've come. There are episodes that go by where Rebecca doesn't even sing. Heather gets a song this season. Valencia gets a song. Really, everyone gets some sort of solo in this. Even in this first half of the season, everyone's already gone to solo, which is incredible. I can't believe I'm actually saying that, but yeah, everyone's already gotten a song this season, and it's crazy, but they really have done an incredible job with expanding their boundaries and really taking this musical approach to full effect and expanding it. And if you thought you saw all you could with the music, I mean, the music this season is exceptional, and they do an incredible job with it. But easily, I think the strongest song of this entire season, which it's very hard to pick because there's so many good ones, like I said, from the Where's Rebecca bunch song that starts off the season to even smaller things like The Moment Is Me, which is this hilarious song sung by Heather. It's hilarious because the whole song is her just talking about how much she doesn't like musicals, and yet she's singing. The irony of that is just great. But also it's her coming to terms with the fact that she doesn't have much direction after this, and that's what a lot of the characters are facing. Their sense of direction is very much shaken up this season. There's a great song by Valencia, so it is hard to come up with one, but if I really had to pick one, I think the Josh Groban song, The End of the Movie, is a pretty big standout, and might be in my top 5 favorite songs the show has ever done. Why? Because not only do I think that song is a great reflection of the episode, I think it's a reflection of the whole show. I really think it is, because the whole idea of that song is that this isn't like a movie, that this isn't something where things are just wrapped up and characters realize what they're supposed to do. It takes time. It's, needs to be something on their own accord. No one's going to do it for them. Nothing's just going to get solved. That's not how life works. Life is, in the song, he talks about how life is a gradual series of revelations, and I would very much agree with that. I mean, we've seen that throughout this entire show. There's been so many revelations Rebecca's had. I mean, this season alone, she has like 5 of them, where she realizes all these things in her life just weren't as important as she really thought they were, and she spent all this time on stuff that just wasn't really going to happen, and stuff that really had no bearing on her overall underlying issue, which is that she does have a mental illness. And there are so many great scenes within just that one sequence. One of my favorite scenes of the entire season involves Josh. He goes in a computer, he types life goals, and he's got nothing. Why? Because he doesn't know what he's supposed to do. The church didn't work out. Him being Rebecca's husband, that didn't work out, so he really is stuck. He doesn't know really what he wants to do at this point, and I think it's incredibly well handled the way they did that. Everything about that song, like I said, I think it's just a perfect reflection of the entire season. It's really, the movie is used as a metaphor for the fact that all these characters want things to just be solved and for things to just end, but that's just not how it's gonna work. I mean, like I said, this is it's gradual, and the fact that he says it's a gradual series, yes, that is exactly what it is. It's very gradual. Things really do take time, and that's something these characters just aren't willing to face, and I love the way that is handled this season. I think it is just the perfect way to sum this entire season up. If you want one song, if you're a person who skips the songs, which I don't know why you do that. I know there are people though who have actually claimed that they skip the songs of the show. The one that I highly suggest you watch, no matter what you do, is the end of the movie. If you watch one scene this season, just watch the end of the movie sequence. It's perfect. It's incredibly well handled. Just coupled with the credits and the opening credits. I mean, that whole episode, like I said, it's styled like a horror movie until it's suddenly not one, where Rebecca realizes this isn't a movie. That's not the way this is gonna go. That's not the way real life works. And when she realizes that, the movie suddenly stops and she goes back to reality and things are now back to normal. And the way it's handled is just, it's so subtle, but it's handled in a way where it just feels so real. And it says a lot. It really does. I mean, it's one of those perfect examples of less is more. And I thought they handled that perfectly here. Just everything about that, I thought perfectly, like I said, was a huge reflection on the season overall. But now that I've gone into all the technical stuff that I've loved about this season, which honestly, I could just gush and gush about it as, for like 2 hours if I wanted to, but I'm not going to make this video that long. Now I do want to talk about the finale, which the finale for the season was interesting because it doesn't necessarily feel like one. It doesn't necessarily feel like a mid-season finale. It feels less like that and more like this is just the time where the show's going to go on a little break, because most of this episode doesn't actually focus on Rebecca. It focuses on Paula, because the whole season, Paula, she's kind of trying to balance her work life and her home life. She realizes that her work life is interfered. She really hasn't had much time to herself to just hang out with her friends or watch Outlander, which we find out she's a big fan of in this episode. So her and Rebecca decide to take a trip to visit her dad, and we see that while Rebecca gets closer with Paula's dad, which we'll get into, Paula runs into, basically, as she calls it, her Josh Chan, who is this guy named Jeff Channington. So it does sound similar to Josh Chan, it's just Jeff Channington. This is the guy who, she first had a sexual encounter with. This is a guy who she had her first experiences with. All this guy really, is a big deal to her, and she hasn't seen him in a very long time, and she tries to reconnect with him, thinking that maybe they're gonna get on good terms, but we see that's just not how it's gonna go. And I love the way this was handled, because you can see Paula, she kind of wants to go back to those glory days of when these two were together, because I think things were just kind of simpler for her. But that's just not how it's going to go. She realizes that there's no possible way these two have a future together, and the way that's handled I thought was great. And while this is going on, we see Rebecca starts to get closer with Paula's dad. They actually start to bond in a way that her and her dad really haven't. And some of the more ridiculous things that Paula's dad has done, some of the more, I'd say, things that you'd see as gross is kind of welcoming for Rebecca. Or, he brings up the idea of like his poop collection, and Rebecca's into it because it's something different. It's just something new. And she gets an idea from her therapist that she should try to have a C+ life. And what he essentially means by that is have a life that's not perfect, but that you're overall content with. And that's what Rebecca decides to do. This isn't a perfect connection at all. It's not something that's amazing. It's not something that goes over perfectly. That's what Rebecca's wanted. She's wanted everything to go over perfectly, and by finding a way to cure herself, she needs to have a connection that just is normal and is very imperfect. And that's what is great about this. There's a lot of imperfections here when it comes to their overall relation. The fact that it is so short-lived, the fact that it does get her to, feel very content with herself. And her and Paula, they have this great scene where she talks about how Paula shouldn't be afraid to tell her anything, and I really love that scene between them where Paula admits about Jeff and all that stuff that they've been through, and Rebecca's not upset about it. She is genuinely okay with it, and that's something, again, that's a huge improvement. The old Rebecca would have gotten really pissed at this. She would have screamed about it, but that's not who Rebecca is at this particular point in time, and I thought they handled that perfectly here. And this really gets Paula to realize her deep admiration for Scott, the fact that these two do have a great relationship, and I really do like the way they're reconnecting here. I thought that was honestly very well done. And the other thing going on is at the very end of the episode, we see Rebecca. She goes back to her therapist, and she tells him how successfully this turned out, and he does in fact give her a sticker for it. And again, it's gradual, but it seems like things are going well for her, and that's something I definitely did enjoy. The other storyline going on is with Daryl, who his daughter can tell what's going on between him and White Josh, and she basically tells him that this isn't going to work. You two just have to fess up to the fact that you need to break up, because it's just, there's no possible way you can be together if you two want completely different things. And the way this was handled, it felt very realistic, because White Josh doesn't want to admit it, but Daryl realizes that he has to. He has to go tell White Josh how he really feels. And in the end of it, they basically decide that they do need to break up. They're not completely separating from each other. I don't think this is the end of it, but they are, in fact, no longer a couple. It's sad, but again, it feels organic. It feels realistic in that manner. It feels like a natural direction for the story, and I'm very interested in seeing where this is going to go. It's something that Daryl obviously didn't want to do. It's just kind of something that he has to do. He wants kids, and that's never going to change, and White Josh doesn't, and that's just something that they both are kind of stuck with here. But the other thing going on is with Josh, which, the regular Josh, not White Josh, I'm talking about the regular Josh, but Josh in general, this plotline I wasn't a huge fan of. He is this bartender. He thinks that this will be like his big career and that this is what he's meant to do. He starts to act like he's Tom Cruise in Cocktail, and I don't know, this just got a little bit too silly for the show. It's something that I think the show is above, honestly. I don't think the show needed to do something like this, especially when he's got this zit on his face and it goes into the drink. I mean, just stuff like that. It's not really something that this show is usually that usually is in the strong suit. It's not something the show usually does. They don't usually do gross out humor like that. So to see them do that here, it just didn't really fit in with the natural flow of things. But I do like the scene where Josh realizes that yes, something definitely is wrong. He still doesn't really know where he wants to go. And I'm guessing the rest of the season is going to be him trying to find his purpose, maybe realizing what he's really meant to do. And I'm looking forward to seeing really what's going to happen there. But that's really everything that happens in the mid-season finale. Like I said, it's pretty much on the level of the first season and less than the second season. Not a lot happens, but there are definitely a lot of good stuff going on here. I think because of how strong everything's been, even some of the smaller things I thought were honestly very strong. Just things like Rebecca telling Heather that, maybe she needs to find a job, and which she does. She decides to become one of the bartenders, and I really did love seeing that, and I very much look forward to seeing where the progression of these storylines do go throughout the season. So overall, guys, like I said, this is a pretty big season for the show overall. There's a lot of stuff to really get into. First of all, as we can see, Rebecca, for the most part, is doing okay. She's getting the help that she really does need. Is it, a huge transformation? Is she a completely different person? No, she definitely does still have borderline personality disorder. That's not anything that's going to go away, but she can find a way to control it. She can find a way to come to terms with it and maybe see the error of her ways and turn her life around. And doing that is, the way to start doing that is what she did. Have a C+ life rather than try to have an A+ life. Just do something average. And she had that great scene where she talks about how, she's always tried to do things, in a good or bad way. She's never really thought of doing things just as a human, where things don't always come easy, but they don't always come hard either. There's that happy medium, and Rebecca just really needs to find it, and I'm really looking forward to seeing really where that does go, if she's able to find it, and if she's able to do that, can her and Nathaniel's relationship really survive? Because we do see at the end of the finale, her and Nathaniel, they have sex, and it's not really a big deal. It's just they kind of just do it, and that's kind of it. They have sex, and it's very average. It's not perfect, and I do think they do have a chance to get Nathaniel has genuine feelings for Rebecca. Rebecca has genuine things for Nathaniel. It feels like a healthy relationship. As long as these two can find some sort of common ground where Nathaniel isn't going overboard and Rebecca can find a way to maybe put her craziness on the back burner, because she's not necessarily crazy. Sure, she definitely isn't well, but I don't think crazy, especially this season, is not the way to describe her. Just very unwell and just very irrational. That's really what she is. Hopefully she can put that on the back burner and they can find a way so she can genuinely have a good relationship there. As far as things do go with Daryl, I'm looking forward to seeing really where this does go. I don't think this is the bitter end for White Josh and Daryl. I just can't believe that's actually going to happen. Those two definitely have the most healthy relationship on the show, and it makes sense why it didn't feel like a big deal when they broke up. Like, this was just a very natural thing. It was something that, similar to Rebecca, they both were kind of ignoring, and leave it to Daryl's daughter to get them to, again, kind of see the error of their ways there. So I'm interested in seeing really where that's going to go. As far as Josh really does need to find that purpose in his life. He doesn't really know what it is at this point. It's definitely not becoming a priest. It's definitely not working in a bartender. So what it really is remains to be seen, and I'm interested in seeing if we do get that answer. I would not be surprised if the show does not necessarily give us an answer with that. Like, maybe Josh just needs to find it himself, and it's not with Rebecca. Him and Rebecca are pretty much done. Josh is definitely irrelevant. He's not really something that is on Rebecca's mind at all at this point, and I think that's for the best, honestly. I think, again, what they had, it was never really a healthy relationship. It was based, and I've said this before, their relationship was a relationship of convenience. The reason they were together is because it was their way of giving themselves direction in their life and giving themselves a sense of purpose. And honestly, I know I complained about those two being in a relationship in the back half of season 2, but now I really do get it. Now I get that these two just wanted to have a genuine connection, and they wanted to have some sort of direction in their life, and that was the only way to do that. They thought the only way that they could possibly have that direction is to be together, even though it, definitely was not at all the safe way to go. So I definitely thought that was very well portrayed here. I really did, really enjoy the way they handled that. And again, just the realism of it all, I think, is just so well realized. And then Paula, it seems like Paula and Scott are on good terms as well, which is surprising because I would have thought, Paula would never take back Scott, but it does seem like she did. It seems like they're on relatively good terms, and I'm looking forward really seeing where that goes. Overall, guys, this season has just been phenomenal. I really have loved everything about minus those few nitpicks that I did have and those few problems here and there. Other than that, this season is absolutely phenomenal. I am very much looking forward to seeing where it does go. If they continue the momentum that they're on right now, I think this has the potential to be the strongest season of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend for sure. It's such a great season about recovery and sort of just taking action and finally addressing those underlying issues that all these characters have really been hiding. It's stuff that finally they're starting to deal with, and because of that, I don't know how much longer the show is going to be on. I think maybe one more season at best, but again, that could very well change in the second half of the season. Last season it seemed like we were going one way and then went a completely different way, and I'm interested in seeing if that does happen this season again. We'll just have to see the way that really does go. But overall, guys, I absolutely loved pretty much everything about this season, and I am going to give the first half of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend season 3 overall an A. So over, guys, the first half of the season of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Let me know what you guys saw this first half of the season overall. Left your thoughts on it. Where do you think it's going to go? Did you like the way it handled Rebecca's mental state? Did you like the way it handled all the storylines going on? Did you wish you saw more of that one character that the show just kind of underused and they just kind of got rid of too quickly? But that's in my review. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys in my next video. Very much looking forward to seeing how the second half of the season plays out, but I will see you guys for whatever my next video is. Okay, bye.
'Cause life is a gradual series of revelations that occur over a period of time. It's not some carefully crafted story. It's a mess and we're all gonna die. If you saw a movie that was like real life, you'd be like, what the hell was that movie about?